where it's said and done. All right, Terrance Brooks. How about this one, guys? And this is, I've seen a couple of the Texas writers that have said this is kind of a head scratcher. He is a highly recruited player. He was a starter, had 3 picks last year, started 13 games for the Horns, who, of course, played in the semifinal game, and he has at least entered the portal. And that's a nugget right there for whoever can pick him up if he doesn't change his mind.
Yeah, and look, yesterday, I don't think we said this on the air, but we were talking about they've lost if you look at the numbers of players that have left Texas, they've got a considerable chunk of their roster that left, but none of the guys that left are anywhere near the caliber of or up the depth chart like Terrance Brooks is, who's an actual starter. Texas has not lost a starter. They have not lost those guys. Those guys are retained and there. And for whatever reason, Terrance Brooks feels like he needs a change of scenery. And I'm sure the SEC's thrilled with that, given the fact that he won't be at Texas if he does, in fact, leave, because he's a very solid player. I mean, this isn't, this isn't maybe like the best cornerback in the portal, but he's one of the best ones. He had 3 picks last year. He's steady. He started 13 games.
Long and rangy.
Honorable Big 12 All-Mention, a former 5-star recruit. So he's going to be somebody that is sought after when he gets into the portal and if he does, in fact, decide to leave. So this is the first one that Texas now has to make a decision on who's going to start if they can't replace him in the portal and if he does, in fact, leave.
Yeah, I mean, that's not one I was expecting. Granted, not boots on the ground or locked in on everything Longhorn all the time. So maybe this was put out there as a possibility, but I hadn't seen that if that was the case. And, I mean, we just saw him in the spring, just spring game, so that's he was on the receiving end of one of those Arch Manning passes that we saw 1,000 times. So, or not the receiving end. He's on the coverage end of one of those touchdowns. But, really good player, solid player, a starter, as y'all mentioned, and a guy who, based on everything I had read previously, was still expected to be a big contributor. Obviously, they had pursued corners this offseason. Muhammad was one of those that they had gone after, Jabbar Muhammad, but did not land him. And so clearly there's a need, but now I guess there's a greater need. And, I'm a little bit taken aback by this. I know that he wasn't perfect by any means, still a young guy with some room to grow, had some issues in coverage from time to time, but not to the extent that I was thinking that they'll push him out, as you see teams doing, trying to flip over their roster. So, that's a really interesting note and a bit surprising.
I saw that term head scratcher with more than 1 or 2 people who cover Texas. And then in the end, they will probably be able to find somebody of equal value, if not better, because they're really good now. What they can do is just pick and choose like they did the Arizona defensive linemen. But they, at times last year in the secondary, struggled. Obviously, Penix picked them apart.
Yeah.
And then in the spring game, obviously, Manning, Owens, and even Ewers picked them apart.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely has some coverage issues. Muhammad ended up going to Oregon, so that's a guy that, like I said, that they had been targeting, looking for some more help. Don't know where they turn now. They are at a point, though, where they're pretty good shape. I mean, I don't think they're going to have too hard of a time going out and finding guys. But then again, as you pointed out, last year, if there was a weakness on that team, it was in the secondary. So I'm not sure how much that changes kind of what their overall game plan was and how involved he was in that game plan. But I'm sure we'll talk to a Texas writer at some point who can fill in some more of the blanks here.
All right, so that's one of the names. The other one, Dylan Edwards. He's a good player. Heck of a running back, Colorado. He has entered the portal. Of course, they got the young man from Ohio State yesterday, so he is on his way out. I saw Sean Keeler, who joined us on Friday's show, who wrote the column about all that Louis Vuitton luggage that Dion has in his private jet. Sometimes he forgets the luggage wherever there's check-in, but they've been able to recover some talent or depth or whatever in the last 2 or 3 days. But this one here, boy, he's a good player. He's one of those that when Colorado had the playmakers, it was Shador, it was Edwards, obviously
Travis Hunter,
the two-way player, but he was one of the guys that made plays for them last year.
Oh, and there will be people after Dylan Edwards. I mean, he was one of their most reliable players on offense, and even though it wasn't really rushing the ball, it was catching the ball in short passes and taking it a long way. So, yeah, this is a hit for them. Look, they did get Dylan Hallman from Ohio State, but I do think losing or Dallin Hallman losing Dylan Edwards will be really tough. And I mentioned to Garrett, look, there's a dearth at running back at LSU, so might be a guy that they want to look after. And with Alton McCaskill leaving because he was going to be RB1, well, that was clearly going to be Dylan Edwards, I would think. But then Hallman comes in, and he's probably now run RB1 at Colorado. And Dylan Edwards is off to the transfer portal, and Deion Sanders is still having trouble building some continuity there at Colorado. And look, the transfer portal is great, and you can do a lot with it. But if it is your, sole source of, water for the lawn, I don't think that's going to be very good.
Yeah, Dallin Hayden's who you're thinking of from Ohio State. But this is a guy we just asked about the other day with our Colorado writer was talking about, so what's the plans? It's Dylan Edwards, at running back, and mentioned Dallin Hayden. And now it's Hayden. And I, fill in the blanks after that. I mean, they've lost almost an entire room to the transfer portal this offseason just at running back alone. So, yeah, we thought Alton McCaskill was, a bit of a loss potentially, but now Edwards goes in. So for all of those questioning what's going on in Boulder, Colorado, and what's happening with Deion's roster and is all hell breaking loose, I mean, they're just giving more fuel today to further ignite those conversations. But, yeah, definitely something's off. I mean, it's not just house cleaning, because it's hard to imagine that there's this amount of guys that are like you're better off without, especially a guy who was a pretty significant contributor last year, which is not saying a whole lot because their running game sucked. But when they did have one, he was part of that. And I would take a long look at Kansas State here. I mean, that's where he was committed for a while. He signed with Notre Dame. But K-State, I would think, would be more than happy to try and welcome him back into the fold, since they were clearly high on his talent to begin with, and just were unfortunately not able to reel him in initially. So, yeah, I mean, he's going to have some suitors, but if I'm looking at the fit that makes the most sense, Kansas State seems like a good place to start.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I saw this from Andy Staples when somebody made the comment that Dylan Edwards leaving into the transfer portal doesn't make any sense. Avery Johnson. You know him?
Yeah, the former Mavericks head coach, former
Kansas
Spurs
State
guard.
Yeah. He said home. He put like a little emoji up, home. And maybe connection there. You mentioned Kansas State.
That's a lot of speed if they did that.
Yeah.
And look, they still have Dylan Giddens, right?
DJ Giddens,
DJ Giddens there. So, yeah, they still have Giddens. I mean, that's a heck of a running offense there for Kansas State, which is what Chris Kleiman would want. But again, I'm gonna say Garrett needs to get on this and call Brian Kelly and say there's running backs available. You better go get one, because running backs and wide receivers are kind of what LSU does.
Yeah, no, they do. And so there we are with Dylan Edwards, who will have already probably had dozens of text messages, if he didn't know already, where he might end up.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good sign that Avery Johnson posted that. I mean, he'd be electric. Obviously, I'm joking about the former whiny-sounding NBA coach who I do have love for, Avery Johnson. But, yeah, as far as this Avery Johnson, who we're just seeing the beginnings of, I think, as far as how special and good he can be, he seems like a guy who's definitely – got that aura about him that other guys would want to play with him. And if you can sit there and say, like, hey, it's got you and me and DJ Giddens and, everybody else that you want to name off that's got potential to play, I think that'd be awfully appetizing for Dylan Edwards potentially. So we'll see. I mean, he gets to go through recruiting all over again, and don't know what kind of offers will be out there for him. But, yeah, that's definitely one to watch in Big 12 country.
This is interesting. Bryce Foster was a highly ranked player that he signed with A&M, and so was Bobby Taylor. There's offensive lineman Dorian Hitton. There's more players. This is from Carter Carrells, hitting what appears to be the portal, saying they're not on right now the 2024 roster. Now, Paul, you sent this earlier. I clicked on it, and it was deleted. It's now there and has been there, but none of those names yet are in the portal. But I remember when Foster was a commit, a big-time offensive lineman, played a lot of a 3-year starter, but one of the things concerned about him has been the injury bug.
Well, they did just get a center from Utah in to transfer for them.
Yep.
Bobby Taylor, just in particular, he kind of felt like one of those Jimbo home runs, but again, they keep on, A&M's going to have less players, and of course this is the transfer portal era, but maybe faster that were recruited and signed by Jimbo Fisher than maybe any coaching change ever, it seems like, because he was a huge recruiting win for A&M.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, the lineage and everything about him, I mean, again, some of the players who say, there's been some players who have entered the portal and then all of a sudden they've taken their names out of it, but most of the time, about 9 out of every 10 who enter the portal are going to end up in another program at some point, not soon, not too far after the time that they enter it. Michigan State defensive lineman has entered the portal. Again, we're not going to mention everybody, but today was a little bit busy. This guy had 65.5 tackles, 6.5 TFLs, a disruptive player, has entered the portal. Defensive end. Remember, defensive lineman, remember what I mentioned, what Bud Elliott said earlier in the week, or maybe it was at the end of last week, that the SEC even needs defensive linemen, right? That's where they're bred. But that he felt like there were 6 players that would end up in the portal out of the Big Ten who played that defensive tackle or interior defensive lineman position. And he responded to this one, including Michigan State defensive lineman Harmon. Here's one of those that Craig's, trend. Louisville defensive back Wesley Walker, who transferred to Louisville, we've seen this before this year, from Tennessee earlier this year, has re-entered the portal. Hummer with the story, Chris Hummer, and that's from 247 Sports, was a starter at Tennessee, began his career at Georgia Tech, prior to Tennessee, Louisville, and now perhaps somebody else.
Look, he and Penny Boone and now Tyler Barron, the defensive end from Tennessee, who had initially committed to Ole Miss and then changed a month later to Louisville in the transfer portal. That's 3 guys. Tyler Barron just jumped into the portal about 15 minutes ago, at least officially. So he was one of the most sought-after defensive ends on the market. So Louisville still has a really good portal class, but maybe not quite as good as they thought it was going to be, because Penny Boone down to Georgia and Kentucky, Wesley Walker on his way out the door, and Tyler Barron on the way out the door. After the ruling this fall with Raekwon Battle or earlier this winter with Raekwon Battle, it opened the floodgates for the potential of this. I just thought that, maybe that'd be kind of a lot, because if you've already decided to transfer, maybe you'd want to go through at least a season with a team before you transfer it again. But apparently spring football is enough.
It's goofy. The whole thing is goofy, man.
Yeah.
It is what it is. I just think that the crazy amount of indecision or the pulling in various ways of players, no matter where they are at any time, is just kind of crazy. The bouncing around's nuts. It makes for interest and some excitement in some cases, but man, it's really hard. Like, if you're a Louisville fan, are you just totally fed up at this point?
Yeah.
I mean, how are you going to? Is your first thought like, let me go check the message boards? It's like, no, like screw this, man. Like, what am I doing? So yeah, that's unfortunate. Penny Boone, good for him. I guess he got better offers, although the last we heard, he wasn't even cracking the starting job at Louisville. I don't know how much merit there was to that. That was the report whenever he entered the transfer portal. But here you have Georgia and who it was?
Kentucky
that
has 2 good places, man.
That no running backs. Yeah. So clearly they like some. He was a really good player at Louisville. So, yeah, I mean, one of those 2 will get a really solid player, and Louisville will just try to regroup, I guess, as best they can.
Kentucky and what Stoops runs, they have had running backs that are good and put up big numbers, and so there's something there besides, obviously, the option at Georgia. Let's go to I got something that's not something I sent to you, Garrett. Max Olster just put this up. So far, 497 scholarship players are in the portal. That's up 47% for this time a year ago. 25% of those names, or at least numbers, are repeat transfers. 48% are leaving what are the now Power 4 schools after yesterday's ruling, Big Ten, SEC, ACC, and Big 12. And the most transfers, we mentioned this, also the position people need, the defensive line, and then also 94, one less at defensive back. So the numbers are up nearly 50% from a year ago after somewhat of a slow start. Not a lot of huge names. We've discussed that. That's mainly in December. but at least there are the numbers up until, and it closes, what is it, April 30th, supposedly, although it doesn't seem like it ever closes, is the end of the transfer portal window.
Yeah, I mean, I guess every year this goes on, there's going to be more and more transfers that continue to boost up those numbers, especially when there's no rules in place to prevent them from transferring more than once. So, yeah, those repeat transfers obviously was up. Just in general, they're up. I think, it's such an open marketplace, and you're not really bound by anything. So if you get the feeling that, you need to change the scenery, or you get that DM or that phone call that somebody's got some money they're willing to offer you, it's easier than ever before and overdue for players to have that movement. So, yeah, I don't think it's all that surprising that there's a ton of movement. I don't know how much of it grades out as healthy in the long run for the players involved, but I definitely think many will be financially set better than they ever would have been in the old system. Is that going to be the case for everybody? No, but it's provided a type of freedom that was long overdue, and yet it has brought an element of just complete uncertainty with who's on your roster at any given time, almost, throughout the landscape. So it's wild and interesting to keep up with, but as you said, it's not been the nuclear explosion that some were teasing for this spring period by any stretch. It's not even been close to kind of what I was anticipating. Granted, those were recruiting services, so they're kind of pumping up the product of trying to sell that. But at the same time, I was expecting a bit more in terms of splashes. So there's been something here and there, like the Penny Boone situation. But as you mentioned, December with the quarterbacks and some of the other top position players was really the big, I think, explosion as far as this cycle of the portal goes.
Well, the quarterbacks, I think Brendan Sullivan, Northwestern's the latest, but again, a second level. With all due respect to him, he played a little bit at Northwestern, but none of the name. Rashada is a name that's gotten a lot of attention, obviously, with a big name from Arizona State. There was a note today on, Paul, you sent this to me and sent it to all of us. The Federal Trade Commission, this is business. And all of you that are involved in some sort of business, the Federal Trade Commission issued a final ruling making it illegal for bosses to make workers sign non-competes in any scenario, voiding nearly all existing non-competes. I've had to be a part of a couple of different non-competes. A lot of people have been asked to be a part of non-competes. That now is off the table.
Well, look, and there might be people in the chat who are like, oh, no, this is terrible news. This is great news. It's great news for people in our business because non-competes have been thrown around in our business ridiculously forever.
What about investment firms and attorneys?
Oh, investment firms, non-competes are bad everywhere. There's people who make very low salaries that are stuck in non-competes. There are people who, especially in our business in news, all right, they don't renew your contract at a station in Tupelo, Mississippi, which is a really small market. But you can go get a job in say, at another company in Birmingham, Alabama, which is a bigger market. Well, it's another company, and you have a 6-month non-compete. So they're telling you that you can't work for 6 months, and they didn't want you in the first place? That's insane. This is awesome news. Awesome. It's going to get fought, but they're ultimately probably going to lose. This is really great news.
I think in the media business, as you mentioned, it is something that has always been used by most anyone that I've ever worked for, or anyone that I know that has been a part of the media business. That doesn't mean everybody. Texas has been pretty good about not enforcing or not allowing or enforcing the non-competes, but this is countrywide, coast to coast, the non-compete now from the FTC.
I can't speak to other industries. I think it's great news. I think it's long overdue, and I think welcome news, as you said, for people like us in the sports media business or media business in general that has been abused by corporations for a long time now, and it's really screwed with people's livelihoods in some cases. And I get you sign a contract, but I just never believed in this as a law or as a rule, and I'm glad to see it go. I think that's great, and that will open up a world of possibilities for people who otherwise are just having to sit at home because of the previous way that things were. So this is progress in my mind. I think it's, like I said, very much long overdue.
And look,
I was curious about retired stockbroker and Kim Coulter.
They both have good things.
Yeah.
I signed a few through the years with Wall Street firms, and none of them stuck or ever enforced. Your business may be different. Oh, it's very different. Like it's one of the things, even in Texas, where like they don't like to enforce non-competes. The companies here will fight them because they don't want you to work for the competitors. And Kim Coulter says, I've beaten several non-competes to hire people away to my company. If you have a solid legal team, they're not hard to beat, and that's true. But the thing is now, it's for people like retired stockbroker and Kim, you don't have to pay for a lawyer to beat a non-compete.
That's the thing. If you're some lowly radio DJ that they just want to screw with, you don't have the lawyer money to go and fight the company, and so you just have to kind of swallow it. I mean, I know people that have had to do that, had to swallow and just deal with it for an entire year before they're allowed to go do what they would always done.
Yeah, so if you were in, again, if you're in Waco and you're a radio DJ and you want to go work for the other company, likely that company's not going to pay for a lawyer to fight your non-compete.
Or they there are times when they won't even talk with you.
But yeah,
as soon as you tell them there's a non-compete, they're out.
Well, that's it, yeah.
But that now is something that today came down. It really affects more than sports, but it does affect our business, or has. And there you are with that. So Kim Coulter and also Chris, retired stockbroker, also mentioning from their end of, and as Kim said, lawyers aren't cheap, no question.
Yeah.
Mike Bean, non-competes are very tenuous. And let's see. There's a couple of others about moving, but not involving the sax man. All from beauticians to doctors are happy. Yeah, I would think the medical business has to be that way, too.
You'd be surprised by the businesses that do have non-competes. You'd be like, we have a non-compete? Yeah, I mean, you're right. There's a lot of different industries that have dealt with this.
Liver transplants at another hospital? What are you talking about? Like,
or paint nails, or whatever. Yeah, I think it's great news overall. I'm sure there's some segment, some corner that I'm not aware of that I just don't live in, that this is maybe not great news, but based on all my experience, I think a lot of people are happy with that.